Hello, my name is Julia Worsley. Welcome to True Crime Stories, brought to you by Portsmouth News. This is the story of Buster Crabb, a spy who inspired the James Bond character. He disappeared on April the 19th, 67 years ago. The real-life James Bond and MI6 spy stayed here at the Sallyport Inn before his disappearance.
My name's Mark, I'm the owner of this amazing pub. I've owned the building since 2015 and did a complete restoration on it throughout lockdown 1 and then finished it off during lockdown 2. Open to the public for the first time in 11 years on July the 4th. So Commander Crabb, or Lieutenant Commander Crabb, whichever rank you choose to use, was an MI6 operative and a Navy diving officer. He was quite an outlandish character, very much of an extrovert, and well known for going slightly against the rules. He also worked directly for Ian Fleming throughout the Second World War, and indeed Ian Fleming put pen to paper to write the James Bond character shortly after Buster Crabb's disappearance from here.
In 1956, the peculiar disappearance of Commander Lionel Buster Crabb sparked one of the biggest spy mysteries ever. And to this day, the truth is still untold, following the extension of the security classification to 100 years, which will run out in 2057.
My name's Anne Bevan, and I work as a volunteer in the Diving Museum, which is currently in number 2 Battery, which is a Victorian battery, one of the Stokes Bay line defences on Stokes Bay in Gosport. Well, Buster Crabb was a war hero, I guess you could call him. He was a bit of a naughty boy, I think, probably, in the Navy, but then there were a lot of naughty boys in the Navy during the war.
Soviet leaders Marshal Bulganin and Nikita Khrushchev were in Portsmouth on a state visit aboard the cruiser Sanik Kitsa, accompanied by 2 destroyers.
That was the day when the visiting Russian ships were parked at South Railway Jetty. And from room 20, which is on the top floor here, you get a direct view to what is South Railway Jetty now, before Gun Wharf in its present guise was built. And that's where he and his accomplice planned their secret missions.
The spy was a brave diver and left the inn before dawn on April the 19th, with a colleague to meet Lieutenant Commander George Franklin, who was a senior clearance diver. They were on board the HMS Maidstone, which was approximately 70 metres away from the Sanik Kitsa. Buster submerged himself into the water to carry out his mission, but returned to the ship, complaining of bad visibility.
Effectively, from the second dive, Buster Crabb never recovered. However, a headless and handless body washed up on the beaches around at Chichester, and it was decided that that was the body of Buster Crabb, and unfortunately the only means to identify him were by fingerprints or looking at dental records, both of which were not possible.
The body was of a middle-aged man in a rubber suit, and the cause of death was unknown.
In the building here I have a copy of the death certificate signed by the coroner, which states that the cause of death unassertable.
The governing authority wanted to prevent the disappearance of Buster headlining the newspapers whilst the Russians were still on their visit, and a police liaison officer went to the Sallyport Inn to remove any trace of the spy and his colleague bunking there.
Crabb came down with an MI6 agent called Bernard Smith, and they both signed into the Sallyport Hotel. And when the government realised, or the police realised what the issue was, they were sent down to the hotel to remove that page from the visitors' book. And of course that absolutely confirmed that there was a cover-up.
He took the pages of the inn's registry and burnt them. But by April the 30th, the press were printing speculative pieces surrounding the disappearance. It's unclear what happened to the spy and the timings from when he disappeared to when his body was recovered, but the inn remains at the centre of the mystery.
My husband was a diver. There were lots of books written about Crabb, and theories about what had happened to him, mostly fueled by the fact that the government were not releasing any information about it. So everyone was speculating, but John's approach was, well, what is the most likely thing to have happened? What is the most probable situation? And given the evidence that we do have, was the body that was recovered Crabb's or somebody else's?
So, I mean, as you know, there are several theories as to what could and could not have happened. Some are realistic, some are slightly embellished. I suppose theory one is this was a diving accident and somehow his body may have got tangled in turning gear. The other one is the Russians killed him because they caught him diving, so and it was them that inflicted the wounds to his body.
There was a Soviet sailor who went on Russian TV sometime later and claimed that he had found Crabb underneath one of the vessels and cut his throat, and proudly displayed the knife which he had hanging on the wall in his room, saying, "This is the knife that cut Crabb's throat." That is extremely improbable. But actually, when a scandal like this happens, a lot of people who even have the very smallest connection with the story tend to slightly elaborate their involvement in the story because it is so extraordinary. And they all want to be part of the story. And I suspect that's what happened with this particular Russian gentleman. I think that's very improbable.
Another theory I have heard is he was about to defect to the Russians, and we knew that, and we, as in the government, killed him to prevent him from defection.
And some people say that he defected because he was finding Scilly Street so difficult. He was interested in joining the Russian Navy. His ex-partner, Sid Knowles, in fact, had a conversation with Crabb when Crabb had been told by his friends, who were Anthony Blunt and co., who at the time we didn't realise were all in cahoots with the Russians, but they had told Crabb that the Russians were recruiting. And Crabb, who was very unhappy working as a civilian, was seriously considering joining the Russian Navy, according to Sid Knowles, his diving buddy. So whether he was captured or not, I think the reason I think it's unlikely is because the evidence that has come out since then, because a small amount of evidence was released 50 years after his disappearance, and then of course another 50 years, it was extended by another 50 years before the full information would be released. But at the time, the information that came out wouldn't have supported that theory.
My favourite theory is this was a real cold case spying mission where it was an audacious attempt to gain an advantage over the Russians by finding out exactly what their sonar and underwater warfare capabilities were, and it just went tragically wrong.
So the body that was recovered, there was actually nothing left of it above mid-chest level. It had all been eaten away. When it was recovered twice, the first time it was recovered, the head rolled off it. It was held on by the diving equipment, and that's how we know what sort of equipment this particular diver was using. But how did the body manage to end up there 15 months later? Well, I know because a lady visited me once when I was working on my own in the museum. She told me a story. She had a friend who was the widow of the man who ran Fort Monkton at the time of Crabb's disappearance. She shared a cleaner with this lady. Now, this lady told the cleaner before she died a story about her going into Fort Monkton to visit her husband the day after Crabb disappeared, and walked into a room and found some people around a table, and on the table was Crabb's body. She was ushered out of the room and told not to mention it, and she did not mention it until shortly before she died, when she shared that information with her cleaner. The cleaner shared that information with the lady who came to tell me the story. My husband went to talk to both the cleaner and this lady to verify the information. And it is almost certainly correct that that is what happened, because we know that divers were sent out the day after his disappearance to look for his body, and his body would most likely have been entangled in the piles of South Railway Jetty, which was around where he was diving. Anything that's going out of the harbour tends to get entangled there. Fort Monkton is a no-go area, and they have a waterfront. It would be very easy to keep a body in a cage there, so that when a body was found 15 months later, it would be in exactly the right condition that it would have needed to have been Crabb's body. The chances of a body ending up at the head of Chichester Harbour naturally are extremely unlikely, because any current leaving Portsmouth Harbour would have taken it was heavy, remember, because it had its diving equipment on, would have carried it straight out to sea. It would not have been carried back in on an incoming tide to the head of Chichester Harbour, which was where it was first found. And then it was found later, floating, because when it was first found, the diving equipment fell off the body. So now the body was light, and it floated, and it was found a few days later at Pilsey Island by some people who actually thought they found a tractor tyre floating in the water. And they brought the body in, and then it was recovered there's an RAF station, they recovered the body, and it was taken immediately in hand and taken to for the inquest and the burial to take place after that. So is it likely that it was Crabb's body? Almost certainly.